Hey, welcome to Plant Yourself. I'm your host, Howard Jacobson. Two quick announcements before we get to today's show. If you're interested in becoming a health coach, I'm offering another run due to popular demand for people who can't make 8 p.m. on Wednesday nights, Eastern Time. So we're doing another run of the program, which will meet, the practicums will meet at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays, Eastern Time, U.S., which means if you're in Europe or Africa, that might be good for you. Also, if you're in the U.S. and evenings aren't good and you have free time in the mornings, either 7 a.m. Pacific time or 10 to 11:30 Eastern, then you can participate. If you want to find out more about becoming a wicked effective health coach, you can go to wellstartcoach.com. Second thing is, if you're not aware of it, Josh Lajani and I have a book that is free on Amazon Kindle. It's called Sick to Fit. And if you just go to Amazon and search for Sick to Fit, you'll be able to download it for free and read it on any Kindle-enabled device, even a phone, smartphone, tablet, computer, whatever. All right, let's get to today's episode. This is the Plant Yourself podcast. I'm Howard Jacobson of plantyourself.com and wellstarthealth.com. This podcast is part of my mission to help you live an animated and accepting life. In Tom Robbins' novel Still Life with Woodpecker, one of the main characters, Woodpecker, explains to the protagonist that there are two mantras in life, yum and yuck. And we have to choose between one of those as the basic orientation of our lives. In other words, are we going to be accepting of life, saying yes to wonderful things, or rejecting and critical and judgmental? And I thought of that when I was having my conversation with this week's podcast guest, Emily Lindsay, who is the lead author of a really important scientific paper on how to mitigate loneliness. So first of all, why loneliness? Well, it turns out that loneliness is actually an epidemic in the developed world, and it's one of the leading causes of disability and early death. It turns out that being lonely, being socially disconnected, is about as bad as smoking a lot of cigarettes or having a crappy diet, that not being involved in social connection, not being befriended and supported by a community or by loved ones is a very unnatural thing for humans, and it can lead to a lot of problems beyond the emotional and social pain of being lonely. So we can approach loneliness in two different ways. One is as the public health crisis that it is, where communities break down, people are spending more time on gadgets, they're working longer hours, and for various reasons, social fabric in this country and across the world is breaking down. Things that family and friends used to do for each other are being outsourced and turned into TaskRabbits and Fivers and Ubers and Lyfts and all those other things. And we've basically taken lots of social reciprocity and commoditized it and outsourced it to the lowest bidder. And that's going to be a long haul to fix. But just like our food system, we have a very dysfunctional, unhealthy food system that leads to a lot of chronic disease, but we don't have to wait for the food system to get fixed to help ourselves and our families and our neighborhoods and our office mates to navigate through it and thrive. And so Dr. Lindsay's work is really about helping us navigate this social landscape of loneliness through things that we can do on our own, even while we're waiting for the system to get fixed, or even while we're elbow deep in trying to create connection. So I came across her work in an article in the New York Times that was titled, "Loneliness is Bad for Your Health, An App Might Help." And it talked about this remarkable study that parsed what about meditation or mindfulness training actually can help us be happier and reduce loneliness and increase social contact. And it turns out that the key ingredient is acceptance, which is to say not just being mindful of things, but saying yes to things and being okay with things happening, even if we feel like we would rather something else happen. So this saying yes to phenomena as they arise during the mindfulness training, yes to, oh, my back is aching, yes to an anxious thought about some work that I haven't yet done, yes to an angry feeling toward a driver who's just cut me off. That's what reminded me of the Tom Robbins quote about yum versus yuck. And I would certainly prefer to live in a more yum world than a yuck world. And I'd like to think that through my own orientation to life, that I contribute to a world in which people can say yes to what is while simultaneously striving to make it better. A couple quick announcements before we commence the conversation with Dr. Lindsay. First of all, Sick to Fit is available on Audible. You can listen to 5 minutes of it on audible.com. Just search for Sick to Fit. If you're not yet an Audible member, you can get your first book for free, and I would be delighted if it were Sick to Fit. Second thing, coach training starts this month. If you haven't yet registered for an enrollment interview, you can do so at wellstartcoach.com, where you can find out all about the program. And finally, another reminder that the Plant Yourself podcast is free for those who can't afford it and is supported by those who can. So if you can and you value this service and you'd like to help defray the costs, you can do so at patreon.com. Just search for Plant Yourself, or you can go to plantyourself.com and click on one of the Patreon or donate buttons on the right sidebar. All right, so let's get to mindfulness, acceptance, and yum and yuck. Without further ado, Emily Lindsay, welcome to the Plant Yourself podcast.
Thank you, Howard.
So I was interested in your work based on, I can't remember where I read of the study, but then I went and tried to find the study. You sent me the formal scientific thing with all the ANOVAs and t-values and stuff. All the statistics that I tried to remember what they meant from grad school. But the basic concept was something that I just found so beautiful and intuitive and powerful, which is this idea that mindfulness plus self-acceptance can help us feel and be less lonely. And I just wanted to unpack all of that with you.
Yeah, so we've been interested in the past couple of years in understanding why mindfulness training, why mindfulness meditation interventions are helpful for reducing stress, helping people deal with loneliness, and so forth. And the idea that motivated this study and others is that we thought that the acceptance training piece of mindfulness interventions might be really the key element that makes it effective for all of these processes. So bringing this attitude of equanimity and acceptance toward our present moment experiences was the idea that this is why mindfulness helps us to regulate our emotions and to help to regulate stress and potentially have beneficial effects for health.
Right.
And so we set out to test this idea by comparing mindfulness training interventions with and without acceptance training. So we had in this study a mindfulness training program that trained people to pay attention and be aware of their present moment body experiences, things like the feeling of your clothes touching your skin, but also sorts of emotional body sensations that we feel. So we had one intervention that just trained those present moment awareness skills, and then we had another intervention that trained that plus acceptance. So really how to bring your attention to your experiences, to really welcome everything that you're feeling, everything that you're experiencing, not try to push it away if it's unpleasant, or avoid it, or try to change it, not doing those things, but instead really saying yes to everything that arises and being open to experiencing all of these things. And that includes difficult feelings and unpleasant feelings of loneliness as well.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to unpack there. There's some definitions I want to pursue, and I'm also scared to turn this into a reductionist thing, which is kind of one of the things that kept running through my head around this. But let's start with sort of the epidemiology of of loneliness. Like what's It's a word that as soon as I hear it and as soon as I say it to people, everyone goes, yeah, we're in an epidemic, but people don't really think about it.
Yeah.
It's not like, getting hit by cars or planes crashing or even heart disease. It's like this very, very silent, unseen thing.
Yeah, but if you do ask people to think about it, I think it's something that people can relate to, even despite being more and more connected on our phones and online. A lot of people are feeling more disconnected from others, and so. What we know from sort of the epidemiology literature is that people who are socially isolated and people who feel lonely have a higher risk for early mortality. So these things are really essential for our survival as humans. As humans, we're social beings. We need to connect with other people. We always have needed to connect with other people in order to survive. And that sort of drive to connect with others hasn't changed. And yet, for some reason, these feelings that we're disconnected and that these feelings of loneliness are on the increase.
Yeah, and I saw some of that research, and I was really struck by the effect of loneliness on mortality, because I generally teach people about, like, the obvious things: what to eat, how to move, sleep, and I know how to tell people how to eat, and I know how to help people exercise. But until I saw this study, I was like, well, if people are lonely, I'm like, well, I don't know what to do. I'm a social goofball. I don't know how to talk to people and make friends. Like, I'm certainly not the person to ask, but it seems like there sort of was a history of mindfulness or meditation or Buddhist practice that made people less lonely.
A little bit. And that's been the problem too. The other side of it is that, we haven't come up with good ways to help people who are feeling lonely. And we're just starting to learn ways to try to help with these feelings. And so there have been a couple studies published showing that mindfulness training may help to diminish these feelings of loneliness, help people stay with the feelings and get through them, and kind of reduce that sort of distress that we feel when we think about feeling alone. And so we wanted to follow that up and try to understand, what is it about mindfulness that helps people who are feeling lonely. And as it turns out, accepting your experiences, being open to them, being receptive to really feeling those deep feelings, those difficult feelings, seems to be really important. And I think that's something that many people don't naturally do. When we're experiencing something uncomfortable, it's common to want to get rid of that feeling and do something to try to fix it or change it or push it away. But this approach is more about just letting it be there and getting a little bit more comfortable with it over time, so that it being alone isn't necessarily related to loneliness. So you can be alone and feel solitude. You can be around a lot of other people and still feel lonely, still feel like you're not getting that connection. So it becomes this issue of how we're treating these feelings that we have internally, versus kind of actual behaviors and connections, social connections.
Well, one of the things you talk about in the discussion in the paper is that loneliness or aloneness or social isolation are sort of recursive, in that when you start feeling separate from people, you then can have thoughts that can lead you to take fewer actions to connect, and then feeling, and then the idea that being alone is perceived as a evolutionary threat. So therefore, now we see the environment as scarier, and so now we're less likely to reach out in connection.
Yeah. I think that's a great summary. It is a threatening feeling. Feeling alone is threatening, and when we feel threatened, that can increase our vigilance to pick out the negative things that are happening in social interactions. When we're talking to somebody, maybe we're more aware of the negative aspects of what's happening, or maybe that threat makes us want to avoid people so that we don't have to deal with the potentially distressing conversation or the negative side effects of negative social interactions. So there's all sorts of processes at play that can kind of keep us in this cycle of feeling alone, not wanting to reach out to connect with others, making us feel even more alone.
Yeah. So is part of this like an evolutionary mismatch? Like when I think of fight or flight, I think of this beautiful dance of chemicals and perception that for most of human history, for most of biological history, has kept organisms safe and alive and able to reproduce, right? There's a threat. Mm-hmm. I'm either going to run away from it or prepare to defend myself against it. And now we know that fight or flight in a world of emails and alarm clocks and passive aggressive staff meetings is actually, deleterious. Did the same thing happen with our sort of loneliness circuitry?
Yeah, possibly, because initially, the idea is that loneliness evolved as a sort of motivation to reconnect with others. So that's kind of the original purpose of that feeling. If we're kind of losing the connection with other people in our community that we rely on for support and survival, if we're losing that, the feeling of loneliness happens to kind of signal or motivate the need to reconnect with others. So that's the initial idea evolutionarily, that loneliness should motivate us to go out and seek others. But I think that it's so easy to avoid others too, because on the flip side, like I said, loneliness is this threatening feeling. And there's so many ways that we can deal with that threatening feeling now that don't involve restoring our social connections and trying to restore social connections. So there's many other stimuli in the environment that we can use to try to reduce that threatening feeling of loneliness that have nothing to do with social connection. We can shop, we can play video games, watch TV, so get that sense that we are connecting with others, but
what about social media? Is that also sort of a pornographic substitute for actual connection?
I don't know. I'm up in the air about that one. I think people have different reactions and get different things from social media, and I think for some people they do get that feeling of connection from social media, and for others they feel increasingly isolated by looking at other people's wonderful lives on social media and so forth. So I think that could go either way depending on the person.
So, one of the things I was thinking of when I was reading the study is, like, this is a social problem that we're trying to solve individually, right? To a certain extent.
Yeah.
That, like, if you were like, so back in the day when loneliness was motivation to reconnect, you had your tribe. Kind of everyone was needed. Like whether you liked, Grunt over there or not, you needed him to go and do stuff. Yeah. And that now we like nobody's necessary anymore. And
yeah, it feels that way, doesn't it? It does feel redundant. And I think that's a related but separate issue is kind of how do we find meaning in our lives? If what we're doing isn't visibly contributing to a small community, if our role isn't to be the person who goes and kills an animal and butchers it for everyone to eat. And so, yeah, I think these are complicated issues as our society changes from the way that we evolved.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking, trying to relate it to this idea of acceptance and self-acceptance. Just like in your tribe, it was kind of binary, I guess. You were either like if you were ostracized, you had done something terrible, or you were just a total leech, as opposed to like, yeah, we're not crazy about you, but we need you. And like there was this substrate of acceptance, of sort of unconditional, you're part of our group. So therefore there was safety in reconnecting. Whereas now, like we have to generate the acceptance ourselves because it's not inherent in the water we swim in.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. That if we're not perceiving others around us to be necessarily accepting of us, that makes reconnecting with others even more threatening, and it makes it an issue for our own feelings of acceptance towards what we're experiencing ourselves. So having a sort of accepting attitude coming from others, maybe acceptance of one's own thoughts and feelings and experiences wasn't an issue, if it was never at risk from others.
So let's talk a little bit about the study design itself. So you said you had it was like three arms. You had your control, which was sort of cognitive stuff. Then you had the monitoring, the sort of mindfulness, and then mindfulness plus acceptance. Now, for mindfulness by itself, I guess, I don't know if I was taught this or if I figured it out somehow, but for me, mindfulness always included accepting the feeling. So like, what are people, if they're being mindful but not accepting? It sounds like it's horrible.
Oh, okay. So the condition, the intervention with this present-focused attention monitoring and acceptance, that is what we consider to be standard mindfulness training.
I see.
Then we created another condition that didn't have acceptance training. And that enabled us to test what is the role of including acceptance training versus just having people bring their attentional focus to their present moment experiences. And it wasn't necessarily not accepting, but what we didn't do was train people how to be accepting of their experiences. We didn't give any techniques for learning how to do that. And so I think what's at play is that you have people kind of strengthening their attention in the condition without acceptance, but then the rest of it was left to people's already existing sorts of strategies for coping or for regulating emotion. So, and I think that oftentimes that isn't accepting. So if you think about sitting in meditation for, say, 45 minutes and it becomes painful, your back starts to ache, your hips start to ache, your legs are going to sleep, maybe you don't like the direction that your thoughts are running away with. And so there's a lot of uncomfortable experiences. And one way to kind of treat these experiences is with acceptance, allowing them to run their course, allowing them to be there, acknowledging them, being present with them, and welcoming them, being open to all of that stuff being there. We can think about being aware of all of these uncomfortable experiences, but having a mental attitude of, I don't want to feel this pain. Why am I feeling this way? Why are my thoughts going over there? That's a non-accepting attitude. Even though we're paying attention to what's happening in our bodies and in our minds, it's not easy to be open to what we're experiencing. And so that's the part that we were really training in the condition with acceptance techniques.
Right. See, here's what I find interesting is, like you said, you had to create a sort of a semi-disabled form of mindfulness that didn't include the natural part of acceptance. And yet,
Hmm.
from my experience and in talking to lots and lots of people, that's our experience of mindfulness, of meditation. Like I spent 3 years as a meditator where the theme of today's meditation is I'm a shitty meditator and what's wrong with me.
Sure.
Like, so I got really curious because what I got from that first article that I read was that there are tools that I didn't know about, maybe even just like a sentence or a word or something that could sort of reinforce acceptance in
Hmm.
ways that even though like I'd heard it from the teacher, I heard it from the
Hmm.
Jack Kornfield tape, like yes, 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 but when I'm in it, I'm still judging myself
Oh,
harshly
yeah.
and
Uh-huh.
and miserable and like, oh, it must be 20 minutes by now. I'll just take a quick glance at my watch and it's like, oh, it's been
Uh-huh.
3.
Yeah. No, I that is a very common experience. But then the idea is that you're working towards non-judgment.
Mm-hmm.
You're working towards receptivity. And what we did in this study was provide a couple of concrete techniques for um, getting people into a more accepting state of mind. And we did that through some body feedback, even just um, bringing awareness to a sense of openness and relaxation in your body. Even if you have little areas of pain, trying to hold an upright, alert posture while relaxing everything else to the best of your ability and really being open to whatever subtle sensations arise throughout the body. And that kind of primes the mind that by intentionally creating a feeling of openness and relaxation in the body, it kind of feeds into the mind, creating a sort of relaxation and openness in the mind, so that even if we're having thoughts that about I'm a shitty meditator, you can be open to that thought, watch it come, watch it go, not get too attached to it. Um, and so it's really about this receptivity to whatever arises in your experience. That's fine. That's okay. I'll accept that. I'll welcome that even. We also we asked people to use a very simple spoken label. This is another common meditation instruction that to label what we're experiencing, and really that helps us to stay with and track and monitor what we're experiencing, so that our minds don't wander away. But we ask people to deliberately use a gentle tone of voice with themselves. So if people were focused on their body experiences, they used a simple label of feel, as I'm feeling something, for example. So what you can do is speak that word out loud, use the same gentle tone of voice in response to anything that you're feeling. If you're feeling pain, you simply say, feel, in a very gentle tone of voice with yourself. So again, you're feeding back into yourself this idea that everything is okay. Anything that I'm experiencing is okay. And kind of treating it with kindness. And we also used another label, which was yes. That's another thing that you can try in your own meditation practice. Just track your experiences, and every time you notice something, say yes. And that's a very welcoming word. You're not saying, no, I don't want to feel this. I'm so frustrated right now. We're very calm with ourselves, and we're using our tone of voice and our words to kind of feed back into our mental attitude, to really embody this attitude of welcoming and acceptance and equanimity. And so even if I think what happens is we hear these instructions to be open, be receptive to whatever happens, but it's really difficult to implement. So I think just by using some of these simple techniques, it gives you a sort of flavor of what it feels like to be accepting, what it feels like to be welcoming. And then once you get a feel for it, you can kind of generate that sort of attitude in your practice a lot more easily than trying to cognitively think about, what does that even mean to not be judgmental? Like, how do I even do that? I think it's difficult to know how to do that, and that in itself can be frustrating. So just using outward cues to feed back to our own experiences can be really useful for giving us a taste of what it feels like to have equanimity.
And I imagine, I think I know from personal experience, but I imagine that saying feel in response to something that otherwise I would say, oh, damn, not that again. And yes, like it provides immediate feedback that's kind of nice.
Yeah. Like, this is okay. But it's as simple as that. And that pain may or may not go away. And that's okay too. But I think with some of our emotional reactions, they're pretty fleeting. And so we can endure an uncomfortable emotion, watch it peak and watch it begin to diminish over time. And by staying with it in that way, I think that's kind of empowering to be able to see the time course of something uncomfortable that arises and diminishes over time.
Well, to me, I mean, it's crucial to the work that I do, trying to get people to change the way they eat. Like, that's what you just said is the central skill. It's because people aren't eating, it's not real body hunger signals most of the time.
Right.
It's, I've got this feeling, emotion, thought, sensation that I want to not notice. And food is a really good distraction.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Or whatever else my vice is.
Right. Just grabbing for the phone and looking at pictures or reading whatever on social media. Yeah, all distractions. And that can be effective too. I think people use a variety of strategies. Acceptance is one strategy. Sometimes we're not ready to experience what we're feeling. And sometimes we do want to distract ourselves a little bit, and that's okay too.
Right. And I was thinking as I was reading it, I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Peter Levine.
I think so.
He wrote a book, An Unspoken Voice, a book, I think, Waking the Tiger. It's sort of about stress and trauma in the body. And one of the points that he makes is that people are very, very resistant to feeling emotions because there's a lot of self-story about the emotion. Like, I shouldn't feel guilt or shame. But when people drop underneath it into sensation, and if you say, well, when you feel depressed or ashamed or angry, what is that in your body?
Yeah.
And people are much more able to tolerate when they translate the same thing into the physical sensations that they give the label to. And I wonder if you found that in the research that people are sort of, the body sensations are kind of a way in to everything else.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Right, when you can kind of reframe a difficult emotion as just a sensation that will pass, that's changing, or that's not changing, but just kind of focusing in on the quality of that sensation. For one thing, takes us out of our heads. If we can maintain focus on the sensation in the body, maybe we're not ruminating or judging so much in our minds. Or maybe we still are. Because that's essentially that's the essence of what we have people do in the monitor-only intervention, the present focused awareness training without acceptance is bring the focus of their attention to their body sensations. But without kind of an instruction in the mental attitude around how to greet those sensations, we didn't find that the 2-week training in just present moment body awareness was effective. Perhaps with longer periods of training, though, that technique could end up being effective for handling emotions.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, but the idea of 2 weeks of training is very appealing, from a public health standpoint.
Oh, sure.
As opposed to, 6 years in the Himalayas.
Right. A lifetime practice of,
So what was like, so it was like a daily smartphone app experience for about how long?
20 minutes a day, plus a little bit of homework practice. And that was very simple stuff, just kind of remembering to apply these practices in daily life for a couple of minutes. So maybe when you are having a conversation with somebody, try to notice what you're feeling in your body and try to welcome those experiences. So it was very short. Mm-hmm. 2 weeks, 20 minutes a day, and just an exploration of how these practices might be applied in daily life.
And so and you found that not only did people describe themselves as less lonely, but when you asked them to count their interactions with others, that it went up. Because one of the things I was thinking was like, maybe people are saying they're less lonely just because they like themselves more. Right? Like, I like people who say yes, whose basic outlook on life is yes, much more than I like people whose basic outlook on life is no.
Okay.
But you say you found it actually increased interactions, right?
Yes. And it's hard to say which came first. Did the mindfulness training with acceptance motivate people to engage more with other people, which then fed into their feelings of loneliness? Or did they first kind of learn skills for managing these uncomfortable feelings of loneliness, which then reduced threat and then made them feel like engaging more in their social networks? We don't know which came first. I could see it going either way. And really, I think we could come up with so many different explanations for how this happened, and it may have differed for different people in the study. But what we do know is that the people who practice acceptance of their present moment experiences for 2 weeks reported feeling less lonely, and they reported having a couple more social interactions each day.
Uh-huh. And what was the time frame of the post? After was it right after the 2 weeks?
Yeah, we measured these experiences in daily life for 3 days after the 2-week period. Mm-hmm. So immediately after they went through the mindfulness training, gotcha. We surveyed how they were feeling in daily life. So an interesting question is, with an intervention so brief, 2 weeks, how long do these effects last? Are they pretty short term? Are they limited to the couple days after the intervention ends if you don't continue to practice? Or are you learning some sorts of skills that that kind of you can incorporate into your daily life in ways that last? So really lots of questions there to explore in future studies, for sure.
Do you have the plans or the means to follow up with people in 6 months or a year?
In this study, no, but I'd love to do another study to see how long the effects last and whether that depends on continued meditation practice.
Right. This, I put my money on lasting and actually increasing, just based on the fact that this is like recursive.
Yeah.
Right. That so if someone even if you have like a 1% improvement in your ability to connect with others, that seems like it would continue like a really virtuous cycle just all on its own.
Yeah, I think that that's definitely a possibility, and an optimistic possibility as well,
Right.
that we need to test.
Well, it reminds me of Greg Walton's, wise interventions
Yes.
things,
Hmm.
where
Hmm.
like the one little shift creates an environmental
Right.
ripple.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think um, that's a definite possibility, that if people learn this new way of kind of interacting with their inner experiences, um, that could change the way that they're interacting with other people. It could change their behaviors in that way, in ways that feed into other aspects of life, and it could kind of balloon into something really positive and spiral upward, just from kind of learning these skills and learning how to use them in everyday life.
Yeah. So was the data gathering limited to the numbers, or did you get like commentary? And,
Oh, like qualitative data.
yeah, that's the word.
Yeah, it was mostly surveys, kind of rating how you feel on a 1 to 7 scale on this thing.
Uh-huh.
We collected a little bit of open-ended data, but really just in terms of how people liked the training programs. And interestingly, people liked all 3 of the training programs. They didn't necessarily like the one with acceptance better. In fact, they didn't like that one better. People liked all 3 programs, but we really only saw benefits for the mindfulness training with acceptance.
That's a really useful reminder for those of us who do programs. And, we rely on the smile sheet at the end of at the end of the program. How did you like it? Like that doesn't tell the whole story.
No, it doesn't. Yeah, people are very complex, and so I think it's interesting and important to collect all sorts of data. And it really depends on what you're going after. Are you looking to add a routine to somebody's daily life that they enjoy enough to continue doing? Maybe that's all you're after. People are unlikely to continue doing something that they don't enjoy.
Right.
But are you looking for sorts of behavioral or physiological changes? Then those are things that need to be measured as outcomes. So in this same study, we brought people into the lab and stressed them out, and measured their biological stress responses. And we found that the people who learned acceptance skills had a less extreme biological stress response.
Oh, how did you stress them out?
We had them give a 5-minute speech in front of 2 critical evaluators.
Okay.
People who were giving cold, icy stares as feedback, who were actually criticizing the content of the speech. I don't see how that point is relevant, that sort of thing. And then they did 5 minutes of really difficult mental math. Same thing with critical feedback throughout. So it's not a pleasant thing to have people go through, but we do it because it gives us worthwhile data to work with, to try to understand how people respond to stress, and how that biological stress response can affect health over time.
Well, and it was also a biological stress response that was very relevant to social interaction,
right,
and inclusion. It wasn't just,
right,
hand in ice water or hold your
right.
breath.
Mm-hmm. We call that a social evaluative stressor. So yeah, you're right on about that.
And so all the people in your study who fail then get jobs as the evaluators, right? So you're a natural.
I'll tell you, that's my least favorite thing to do is act mean to other people in the lab when they don't deserve it. But it's important data to collect so that we can understand how to move around these biological factors that are important for our health.
That's hilarious. So did you come to this work through an interest in loneliness or an interest in mindfulness or both?
An interest in mindfulness and mind-body practices more generally, and really how these practices work, if and how they work to improve our stress responses, our social experiences, our emotions, and ultimately our health.
And so, like, did you start just like as a meditator or a mindfulness person interested in the science? Because, like, I studied this. I've been studying sort of the science when it was weird, right? Like I in 1993, I was thinking about doing a dissertation on this, and basically it was either this is all BS or like the benefits are nothing short of like levitation. I don't know, what's the state of the science of this these days?
It's a completely different climate now than it was in the 90s. There were very few studies before 2000. But the number of research studies has increased exponentially, and also the interest from people in our society has increased as well. So that kind of motivates scientists to want to study these practices. Are they effective? How are they effective for people? So I think at this point in time, you won't get laughed out of your department if you're studying practices like mindfulness meditation, whereas it probably wasn't taken as seriously in the 90s. These sorts of hippie ideas about transcendental meditation, and it was not as well accepted as a serious topic of scientific research. But we have to be grateful for the people who published research in those days to really get this field going, and made a foundation for doing this sort of work.
Right. And one of the things I was wondering as I was reading, especially sentences like, where is it? Future research might untangle which process begins to change first as, investigate plausible chains of mechanistic processes. Like, I'm just imagining, I'm projecting onto you and other sort of mindfulness researchers a very holistic view of like life in general and biological processes and complexity. Is there a bit of a tension between that view and what the current scientific model sort of demands in terms of reductionism and chains of plausible causation?
So you mean, are we able to study more holistically a person's behaviors and interactions and feelings and health outcomes, or do we necessarily need to be very specific about, well, this study is going to specifically test which process changes first, loneliness or number of social interactions? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah,
we need to be very narrow in our investigations.
Yeah, that is there, sort of interest and career advancement and funding for questions that you might in your heart say, who cares? Like, let's just find out what works and make it better, as opposed, are there sort of tensions between what you would consider the purest scientific inquiry and the demands of publication and career?
I see. Yeah, I think there's a dance between what organizations like the National Institute of Health are looking to fund, that really kind of dictates which projects get funded and where the research money goes. That's definitely a consideration when thinking about what is the next research study I want to design. But at the same time, the NIH's priorities are around these large issues of health, human health. How do we improve chronic pain? How do we improve inflammation in the body? These practices, maybe mindfulness practices, there's some great initial evidence suggesting that they're effective. So maybe we're more interested in funding projects on those sorts of topics. So I think there's definitely a dance between what question would I love to answer in my career versus what are the priorities of the funding bodies. But at the same time, I think that the ultimate goal is very similar in that we're trying to improve quality of life and health for people. It's just a matter of how we do that, how we study that.
Sure. So earlier we talked a little bit about the fact that this is sort of a societal loneliness is a societal problem, and meditation or mindfulness is an individual solution.
Mm-hmm.
Is there, first of all, I guess if you get 100 million people to start meditating, that changes society. But short of that, because when I teach people to eat healthy, I think everybody who stops buying, Big Macs and Twinkies is like a drop in the bucket in terms of changing the demand cycle.
Mm-hmm.
But are there specific interventions at a organizational or governmental or social level based on your work that you think might have a broader influence than just sort of teaching people a skill one at a time?
I think that's a great question. And I think at this point, we're kind of relying on individuals to create momentum with these practices, spread the word about how they're beneficial, kind of seeing more interest from the media, kind of spreading the word about these practices and what people get out of them. I do see bigger companies kind of trying to implement these practices for their employees, having a mindfulness room, that sort of thing. But I mean, this is part of the story. You're talking about kind of food choices. We're talking about meditation. There's all kinds of processes that are interlinked and also separate. It's just, I wish I could answer the question of how can we improve quality of life and health for the most number of people in society. But I don't know what the answer is at this point. I'd love to hear ideas if you have them.
Well, one idea is it sounds like that's a pretty good career question.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Large scale change.
Yeah. Just keep avoiding the traffic and submitting proposals. And
yeah.
I think we're in good hands.
Yeah.
Hey, I had a question about so you had people working on an app. And so for people who are listening who are going, yeah, this mindfulness plus acceptance sounds like a darn good idea. Do you have an app that people could use, or if not, are there things you recommend?
Yeah, the mindfulness training programs were created by a teacher called Shinzen Young. He has a lot of resources on his website, shinzen.org.
Okay, I'll include a link in the show notes.
Okay, great. And then he has also, his system of teaching meditation is the basis for the Bright Mind app, which is available in the App Store. And then the program that we used in this study will be available to individuals at ebmforstress.com. At this point, people would need to contact the head of that company to get access to the program, but it is something that people can try out, the exact program that we used in this study.
Okay. Great. So if they go to ebmforstress.com, there's a link to contact.
Yep, and contact and ask for access to the program. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. What's your next bit of research?
Well, I'm looking into some of the biological processes that might help explain how mindfulness training might reduce loneliness in lonely older adults who are 65 years and older, and how that might affect biology in ways that could improve health over time. So I'm looking at some of the biological processes that might be changing in lonely older adults who are going through meditation training.
I see. So do you hope to connect those to outcomes like, inflammation and
yes, exactly,
cholesterol and
we're not measuring cholesterol, but inflammation, yes. Trying to understand those biological processes. Mm-hmm.
Wow, very, very cool. So I reached out to you via the academic web. So I don't know if you have a public presence or a blog or a social media presence that you want to share with people, or if there's a way for people to follow your research and your career to answer that big question of how can we be healthier?
I don't actually have a social media presence.
That's probably why you're so happy.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a Google Scholar page for people who are interested in reading scientific papers.
Okay, I'll link to that as well. So we'll protect your privacy and sanity then.
Yes, as of now, I don't have a blog or a Twitter or anything like that.
Okay, so you're unlikely to make the public podcast circuit. So people want you, they got to find you here right now.
Right, have to find me the academic nerdy way.
Awesome. Well, Emily, Lindsay, thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful conversation, and your work is so instructive and inspiring, and it's definitely influenced how I think about helping the people that I work with.
Very nice. Well, thank you so much for having me and for an engaging conversation. And thank you so much.
All right. Well, take care. All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode. Man, one of my favorite things to do on this podcast is to talk to these researchers who, to me, are rock stars, but they're not really well known outside of their own academic field. And so it's not that hard to get them to appear on podcasts, especially before they've written their first, best-selling book. Anyway, I hope you found this valuable. If you did and you'd like to let people know about it, you can leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Stitcher or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you subscribe, then you will never miss another episode. Quick reminder that if you'd like to improve your own health and take your health destiny into your own hands, that's what WellStart Health is for. You can go to wellstarthealth.com and sign up for one of our upcoming 12-week on-ramps to health. It's a great program. Josh Lajani and I are the head coaches, but we have lots of other coaches, including Kevin Davis, Sarah Bofinger, Ron Tibbs, and a bunch of others you'll be meeting over the next few weeks. We're ramping up. In garden news, we got about 70 different basil plants going in the dining room under lights. Mia planted potatoes the other day. And we're very excited. Our giant roll, 330 feet of 10X deer fencing is arriving on Friday. So hopefully we'll get that up and we will not have to share quite so much of our bounty with critters. In running news, I registered for the Umstead Half Marathon, which is coming up middle of May. And very excitingly, I posted on Facebook, I whined a little bit about plantar fasciitis, and Tom DeLonzo Baker, the founder of Total Motion Release, reached out to me and spent 90 minutes on Zoom with me, taking me through exercises. And by the end of that 90 minutes, I had zero pain. I woke up this morning back to about a 20 out of 100, and I started doing the exercises, and it's back down to about a 5. I didn't get it all the way to 0 because I wanted to get this podcast up before heading off for the day. But if you are interested in physical therapy and in how to treat yourself and in how to help other people learn how to fix themselves, I can't recommend highly enough Total Motion Release, which you can find at totalmotionrelease.com. Tom DeLonzo Baker is an absolute genius and one of the nicest guys you'd ever meet. And while I'm thanks-seeing, let's keep it going with thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. Check out willridenauer.com for more of his lovely Kora music. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons, the people who make this show possible every single week, as in Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jane Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Burns, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Vilkanovsky, Debbie Bizek, Mysterious Michelle X, Elspeth Felden, Victoria Dolomanova, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Landry, Josina, Julianne Rowland, Stu Dolnick, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wade Pedersen, Leanne Peterson, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gila Sayre, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizo, Gio and Carolyn Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Stephanie Holmes, Martha Bergner, Nicole Ramsey, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Lashley Corcoran, Michelina Chia, Deanne Norton, Ani Bonnie, Lynch Plant, Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Shell Rootless, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Brian Sheridan, Shannon Hirschman, Kate Roseland, Ayat, Julie Lang, Holmhead, Gardiza, Tuzin Wakani, Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Aviva Lel, Heather O'Connor, Callan Jensen, Sherry Lakoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Tevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, Kelly Baker, Miracle Ann, Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Deb Casilla, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Karts, Deanne Bishop, Bilvery Elf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Bolden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunn-Marie Hagen, Tracy Gulledge, Laura Heaton, and Meg from Mama Says, for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for this week. As always, be well, my friends. All right, time for thanks. Thanks to Will Ridenauer for allowing me to use his beautiful song, Sabali Dawn, the Dance of Peace. You can find more of Will's music at his website, willridenauer.com. And of course, thanks to all of you Plant Yourself podcast patrons. Kim Harrison, Lynn McClellan, Anthony Disson, Brittany Porter, Dominic Maurer, Barbara Whitney, Tammy Black, Amy Good, Amanda Hatherley, Mary Jean Wheeler, Ellen Kennelly, Melissa Cobb, Rachel Behrens, Christine Nielsen, Tina Sharp, Tina Ahern, Jen Filikanovsky, David Bizek, The Mysterious Michelle X, Elspeth Feldman, Leah Stoller, Alan Christensen, Colleen Peck, Michelle Andrews, Josina, Sarah Durkis, Rhymes with Circus, Kelly Cameron, Wayne Pedersen, Janet Selby, Kara Adams, Tom Franzek, Jeanette Benham, Gila Sayre, David Donahue, Blair Cyber, Dorona Vizo, Gio and Carol Argentati, Jody Friesner, Ruth Ann Thunderberg, Misha Rosen, Michael Warbeck, The Equally Mysterious, Tracy Z, Aviva Lael, Alicia Lemus, Rebecca Hughes, Val Linneman, Rhymes with Cinnamon, Nick Harper, Martha Bergner, Susan Ahmad, Molly Levine, The Inscrutable, Harry R., Susan Laverty, The Panda Vegan, Craig Kovic, Adam Sharp, Karen Burry, Heather Morgan, Kelly Machia, Deanne Norton, Bonnie Lynch, Plant Happy Oregon, Sabina Kurtzels, Nigel Davies, Marion Blum, Teresa Copel, Julian Watkins, Breed O'Connell, Shannon Hirschman, Linda Ayat, Holm Hedegaard, Tuzin Wakani, Hainline, Aaron Greer, Alicia Davis, Heather O'Connor, Carolyn Jensen, Sherry Orlikoski of Plant Powered for Health, Karen Smith, Scott Morani, Karen and Joe Crabtree, Tanya Lewis, Kirby Burton, Teresa Carell, Kevin McCauley, Elizabeth Rothschild, and Jesse, Cheryl Dwyer, Jenny Hazelton, Valerie Peltier, Peter W. Evans, Colleen Harrison, Justine Divitt, Joshua Sommermeyer, Dennis Bird, Darby Kelly, Lori Fanny, Linnea Lundquist, Valerie Hummel, Emily Iconelli, Levy Wallach, Rosamund McAtee, Dan McCorney, Stephen Lehman, Patty DiMartino, Mike and Donna Karts, Deanne Bishop, Bilbery Elf, Gunter Schmidt, Marjorie Lewis, Kelly Molden, Tricia Adams, Ian Kramer, Nancy Sheldon, Lindsay Bayshore, Gunn-Marie Hagen, Tracy Gulledge, Laura Heaton, Meg from Mama Says, Rochelle Kennedy, Diana Goldman, Stacey Stokes, Ben Savage, Michael Kay, Holly Butler, Diana, David Hughes, Connie Rogers, Claire England, Sally Robertson, Param Ganchi, Amy Daly, Brian Tourville, Mark Jeffrey Johnson, Josie Dempsey, Karen Schmidt, Pamela Hayden, Emily Perryman, Olga Sidorowska, Allison Corbett, Richard Stone, Lauren Vaught of Edible Musings, Aaron Hasty, Sean Owen, Sagar Nayak, Erica Piedra, and Danielle Roberts for your generous support of the podcast. That's it for today. As always, be well, my friends.